The president wants to crack down on companies that are abusing the H-1B visa program. The work visa is intended for companies to hire foreign nationals with special skills. But, you know, nowadays, a lot of companies are just using this program to hire foreigners and pay them less. President Trump plans to end this by making this a merit-based system. In other words, you need a real skill if you're going to come here on one of these H-1B visas. It cannot be a lottery system. Joining me right now with their thoughts on all of it, how it's going to work, Fox News contributor Steve Cortes and Democratic strategist John Rowley. Good to have you both here. Steve, it makes sense to me, right? We want to attract the best possible people here. And, you know, part of that means we've got to have expectations in terms of who gets the visa.
Right, Trish, I think the policy makes sense, and I also think the place makes sense, by the way. As a veteran of the campaign, I'm so glad that he's going back to Wisconsin, a state we worked really, really hard to win. There was a huge surprise to the rest of the world, but I don't think to us because of how hard we worked there. But in terms of the policy, this is Trump at his very best. He promised throughout the campaign, promised in his inaugural address, that his policies would revolve around putting the American worker first at last. And this H-1B program, while it was set up with very good intentions, like many government programs, it's been incredibly abused. It was supposed to be for finding highly skilled people who we couldn't find in the United States. Physicists, neuroscientists, surgeons. Instead, what does it become? It's become effectively a subsidy for very big companies where often low-skilled or unskilled workers are brought here to compete against American workers. That's terrible policy, it's unfair, and it's going to end.
Well, you know, you think about the Disney example where workers sued because they were so upset that so many tech workers, IT workers, had been brought in at Disney to replace them. These workers, American workers, actually had to train the IT workers, and they were training their replacements. And they said, hey, this isn't fair. Basically, they thought Disney was using this as just a way to get cheaper labor.
Yeah, and, you know, Trish, and a similar example of the hypocrisy, and it really galls me, is a lot of giant American banks who were bailed out by the American taxpayer. A lot of those giant banks are now using H-1B visa people to replace American workers. So the very workers who saved these banks, who saved Wall Street's butt when Wall Street needed it, are now being replaced as workers by unskilled or low-skilled H-1B visas. It has to stop.
John Rowley, I mean, look, I'm all for having the best possible workers. I really do believe that. And if we don't have someone that can fit a job description and we have the ability to get them from another country, sure, bring them here. But what Disney did, or what he's accusing other companies of doing here, that's not where we should be heading. That is not what this program was intended to be. How do we fix it?
Well, I think any program that has needs to be reevaluated if there's abuse. So, I mean, I think this makes a lot of sense. I mean, hopefully the president won't do the few times when I've agreed with him, and I agree that, you know,
this is one of those few
anything that's broken. Exactly. But I mean, hopefully they won't fumble the ball this week when he's making a couple, you know, somewhat solid moves, including going to Wisconsin. So hopefully they can stay out of their own way this week.
Well, Wisconsin, Steve Cortes is saying, look, it makes sense. I mean, a lot of workers there feel that you're pretty upset with the way this economy has been treating them. Is Wisconsin an area that, you know, politically speaking and economically speaking, he needs to continue focusing on? John Rowley.
Yes,
yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm a little surprised he hasn't gone back sooner than this. And, you know, I think most people would agree that if there's federal contracts and federal money, we ought to try to keep that in the United States. I mean, I think it's something, hey, I can amen a lot of what he's talking about, whether he's going to get distracted on some other side issue or he or a member of his team is going to fumble the ball this week. Anytime he's made some other positive moves the last few months, we'll see if that happens.
Well, yeah, and you know the media is ready to pounce when that does, if it does happen. But let me ask, we just have like a minute left, so this is a tough question to throw at you, Steve. But, you know, we're dealing with a situation right now as this economy changes and globalization is the reality that we're confronting. You are seeing basically capital, people with capital, companies with capital being rewarded in a disproportionate way to labor. In other words, the worker nowadays doesn't have as much leverage because these companies, you know, find another way to do it. They find a cheaper labor source. How do we start to get all this back in line? And I'm not talking about through a bunch of regulations, but how do we create the right incentives so that workers have more power and it's not all distributed amongst those with capital?
Right, Trish. No, listen, that's a great question, and I think it's the heart of this Trump movement that swept him into the Oval Office. You mentioned regulation, though, and I think that's a big part of it. One reason that we've had such a cronyist system and that there's so little dynamism in our economy, I think, is stifling regulation, which makes it so hard for the little guy or the little firm to rise up and challenge the big players. It's one reason why, for the first time on record, more businesses closing than opening in America. We have to reverse that. The president has already started to. Regulation rollback has commenced, and it's going to accelerate, I think, from here. That will allow far more dynamism in our economy and will allow small firms and entrepreneurs to flourish.
We need it. All right.